Hello everyone, welcome back. Today's topic is going to be on popular Bitcoin fallacies. It's been really frustrating to watch so many false narratives around Bitcoin persist, and they're repeated over and over again by people who either don't really understand what they're saying or are too financially invested to think critically. I didn't make this video because I think it'll change anyone's mind. Most beliefs are defended until the end, especially the popular ones, and they really only break down in hindsight once the consequences play out. But I'm making this anyway because someone has to say it. I've repeated it online a bunch of times, but I've never made a comprehensive video discussing a large majority of them. But if we want to understand where the market's really headed, we have to start by challenging these myths that it's built on. So in this video, we'll go through some of the most widespread and popular fallacies in the Bitcoin space and why they really don't hold up under critical thinking. So first, why have these fallacies developed? Really, there's a lot of reasons. I think it starts with financial incentive. So people who buy into Bitcoin or are speculating on it want the price to go up. And so they become psychologically biased towards deflecting any negative comments. It's seen as FUD, fear, uncertainty, or doubt. Um, and they're vehemently defended online. That financial incentive leads to belief formation. So once people have um, a large position, and a lot of times it's 100% of people's net worth, they're so heavily invested that they become emotionally tied to its success. Belief in its inevitability helps justify their position and really reduce their own personal anxiety. It's easier to believe you'll get rich than to accept uncertainty or flaws in the system. This then creates this larger culture of religious style social reinforcement. It's kind of like politics or religious spiritual communities, but it's formed around a money. The communities reward loyalty and narrative conformity while punishing dissent. So it's really about social validation. That's why you see the rise of a lot of the popular Bitcoin influencers, and then they're incentivized financially to say the same false narratives that their followers want to hear, right? That to me is why the Bitcoin Standard Book succeeded and why a lot of the other popular Bitcoin influencers did so well. They just regurgitate anything that says number go up. Um, so it's really social validation over objective analysis, and then like this mimetic behavior. They don't really understand what's going on. They just want to belong to the tribe. Influence of early success and price action reinforces those beliefs. So Bitcoin's giant price rise gave early adopters sort of this godlike status. Their stories created this like these myths that new investors want to replicate. Price becomes then proof of truth, even when fundamentals diverge. So what started off as a grain of truth and like organic monetary adoption that we stated in previous videos eventually led into this crazy bubble. And I think it's the biggest bubble in human history. But it's the classic like narrative momentum and then the macroeconomic stuff that's driving it. Five is lack of economic and technical understanding. I think both these 2 points, like the technical understanding is very hard, right? It's cryptography, which very few people are well versed in, and the computer science aspect is difficult to understand. So most people don't even inspect the source code or know anything about what it does. They just rely on other people's opinions, and those people are biased. So that's part of it. And then the economic understanding is limited. Most people don't really deeply understand money. They might think they do, and I think that's why we see a lot of these misapplied historical narratives that I'll talk about in a sec. Then we have hero worship and thought leadership bias, like billionaires like Saylor or influencers that have millions of followers and endorse Bitcoin. People assume they must be right because they have this credibility socially. So it kind of creates this appeal to authority fallacy, especially when combined with prior wealth or status. Like people that have succeeded previously, if they're promoting BTC only, then more people are going to trust them. But these same figures are often riding momentum, not really offering any sort of deep critique. They're just regurgitating stuff. Um, Misapplied historical analogies. I just talked about that, but I don't want to get into too much detail. The most obvious one is the analogy to gold. I think there's a deep misunderstanding, and I'll talk about that later. There's FOMO, so fear of missing out, right? That's why a lot of institutions are piling in. Now, these people operate under the same emotional bias that retail investors do. There's also this black and white thinking, so it's binary thinking. Like either Bitcoin's inevitable and going to replace the world, or it's going to zero. That's like the stupidest thing in the world that I've ever seen. No good, which Bitcoin is just a good, uh, either goes to infinity or zero, right? There has to be some nuance, which we've talked about in previous videos. But then number 10, hope in a broken world, right? A lot of people are poor, they're worse off. They need this hope that they're going to become rich, and they put all their belief into that. And once they're financially invested, it's like very difficult for people to accept any criticism because it feels almost like a personal attack on their future net worth. Then 11 is familiarity. Bitcoin has this brand recognition, and people feel comfortable buying the thing that everyone else owns, and has been recognized globally. And then 12, there's like this illusion of control, right? You have all these credible institutions and people saying Bitcoin's inevitable. And so people think that like governments and nation states are going to endorse Bitcoin, and that for some reason means the price is going to continue to go higher, when actually the opposite is true. So let's get into, after we just talked about why the reasons have developed, what the actual main fallacies are. So number one, I'd say, is the fixed supply fallacy. This is the infinity over 21 million type belief, where people think Bitcoin is such a great money that it's eventually going to dominate, and they don't really look at any fundamental statistics. But the fallacy is disproved pretty easily. Fixed supply doesn't guarantee price increase, right? Almost every asset in the world has a fixed supply. Any digital asset can be fixed in number of units. That's not what drives price. It's really demand. So scarcity alone means nothing without the demand side function. So we know with Bitcoin, as we've talked about multiple times, as demand grows for its actual fundamental value prop, so does the cost, which creates a monetization limit. So that one's debunked. Scalability fallacy is the next one. Bitcoin is thought to be able to scale through institutional layers, right? You're seeing the narratives all over social media now, where banks now can offer Bitcoin services. This is temporary, right? Bitcoin eventually can't scale through centralized credit layers without losing its core value proposition, because these centralized custodians are vulnerable to political capture. And once that happens, Bitcoin becomes just another state-dependent system. I mean, this happened to gold, and people misunderstand the historical analogy with gold, right? Gold failed because people were effectively stripped from their money, right? And instead of using gold, they used paper dollars. Except eventually the dollars became unredeemable, right? The government printed more supply than they had in gold in reserves, and couldn't meet those obligations, so they devalued the price. They banned ownership. The key point here is that once you strip the population of the money itself, there's no way to audit the supply. Right? You don't know how much paper is in circulation, so you lose protection over inflation and censorship as soon as that political capture happens. And the same thing would happen to Bitcoin. It just doesn't happen yet because it's not a threat. It's just used as a speculative asset for now. The next fallacy is reserve currency fallacy. That's what I just described. I didn't realize that was next. But the idea that Bitcoin will become a reserve asset backing state money repeats the same gold to paper trap as just described. So that one is debunked. The next fallacy we have here is Bitcoin won't be banned because it's popular. This is super prolific right now because you're seeing institutional and nation state endorsement. But Bitcoin's only popular as a speculative asset, not as a real threat to state money. So when it becomes a threat, bans become more likely, not less. Popularity is actually why things get banned. It's just Bitcoin's not popular to resist money. We explained in the previous videos why it will eventually likely be popular to be used as a tool of resistance, but we haven't gotten there yet, and that's why it's not banned. But look at any other thing like drugs, encryption, or privacy tools. The state doesn't care about it if nobody's using it. They only care once enough people are using it that it becomes a threat. And even with limited use of coin mixers and privacy tools, the state took action. The next fallacy is that Bitcoin is just BTC, and this is still widespread. Probably one of the most widespread fallacies. There was a lot of insider um, collusion to try to make BTC like be publicly marketed as the only Bitcoin chain. Right? You see it all over the place, and most people believe that's true. That BTC is the only real Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is really just a design. It's a security architecture, not a specific chain history. Any chain that follows the original rules of the peer-to-peer electronic cash system white paper is a Bitcoin chain. Litecoin is the second most used one. You can verify that with on-chain stats. Um, but this idea that Bitcoin is just BTC and that BTC is the only one that represents, freedom, has any potential to be censorship resistant is just a lie, because people want price to go up and they want to market BTC as having all these qualities and everything else is a shitcoin. The next fallacy on here, jurisdictional arbitrage. This is very popular because when China banned Bitcoin in 2020 or 2021, you saw a lot of hash rate move to the US, so this actually got more popular, not less. But the idea that Bitcoin can survive bans by relocating to friendly countries assumes states will allow this indefinitely. But as we've seen throughout history, and again, we have historical precedent for this, is that non-compliant states become rogue states and they face international pressure. That's why we have institutions like the IMF, right? This is International Monetary Fund. They work together. Sometimes governments have more in common and shared interests with each other than with doing what's best for their respective populations. There's other organizations too, like the G7, right? These types of organizations between nation states that collaborate will do so, just as they've done in the past around Bitcoin if it becomes a threat to multiple states at the same time. The next fallacy is that price equals better money, meaning that because Bitcoin's price has gone up and outperformed most everything else, that's like validation that it's the best asset. But really, people should know that we're in the speculative casino phase of the market. Most assets are rising on inflation, not on fundamentals. And Bitcoin's price or higher price just reflects that it's way more popular. It reflects speculation, not superior utility. If that was the case, then Bitcoin would not be losing monetary dominance against other chains. It is. So Bitcoin really trades like a meme coin. It's not a trusted global currency. The narrative of digital gold is popular because of price momentum and not really understanding. That's another huge fallacy too. Comparing it to gold doesn't make any sense. Gold has had a ton of network effects and is a very highly widely adopted global money and still is in parts of the world, and that's what really supports its price. Bitcoin is not that at all. Bitcoin trades like a high beta tech stock or a meme coin. So popularity is actually creates price risk, like significant drawdown risk, not sustainability. So popularity doesn't equal long-term monetary dominance. And over time, we'll see that play out. So that narrative and fallacy is untrue. The next fallacy that I have listed on here is that credible people believe in it, and so it must be the best asset. There's a lot of smart and wealthy people that talk about Bitcoin today, but it doesn't mean they understand it. People tend to conflate previous success with any individual's career or private life with understanding multiple topics, right? So you see a lot of like fund managers and macro asset guys talking about Bitcoin, but these guys often lack the technical understanding that you must have. You must put the two together, macro and the microeconomic portion of Bitcoin, right? You can't just understand one. And so this is partially why the price is so overvalued relative to its monetization level, is that you have a lot of credible people talking about Bitcoin, and so naturally people follow each other, and you just get multiples higher followers the more credible you are. So people like Saylor, I'm sure, brought in a ton of people, right? He's convincing corporate treasuries to buy Bitcoin because of his success previously. But their conviction, just like everyone else, is based on belief, not analysis. The next fallacy is institutions will end bear markets. So there's a narrative that had been proliferating around that because institutions are here, Bitcoin won't see like 80-90% drawdowns anymore. But institutional adoption to me actually creates way bigger downside risk because institutions don't care about Bitcoin censorship resistance. They're not going to ever use it. They're most vulnerable to political capture. They might be forced sellers, and they just care about number go up and return. So they will be selling. And when liquidity dries up or the macroeconomic environment changes, they'll sell. Unlike retail, a lot of retail just long hold through multiple 80-90% drawdowns. These guys won't. So they're less convicted holders. The next one that's been proliferated by Michael Saylor, and I know this is used as a metaphor most of the time, but it's the idea that Bitcoin stores energy. Bitcoin doesn't, nor does any money really store energy. It consumes energy, right? To pay for security. Bitcoin expends energy and costs something to use it. I know the popular metaphor is that Bitcoin is a better store of value, and so then people compare it to storing energy, right? Like if you're going to put your money in Bitcoin or in Japanese yen because of prior price action, it's a better store of value. That's what most people are using the metaphor to compare. But even that's wrong, right? Like you could pick a meme coin or apply it to anything else that's outperformed Bitcoin over a certain time period and say it stores energy better. But both reasons, right? Like literally it doesn't store energy, it consumes it. And if you're using the metaphor for store of value, it's just succeeding on speculation, and inevitably when price falls to its monetization level, that store of value narrative will die too. The next fallacy we have listed on here is the halving theory fallacy. There's still this widespread belief that because every 4 years Bitcoin's block reward declines by half, that it's a primary reason why Bitcoin's price continues to appreciate. It's often hyped as a unique market catalyst and reason for number go up, but the impact is largely overstated. I mean, now since we've had so many halvings already, and that the supply reduction, the amount of less issuance is so much less significant, it's not going to make a meaningful impact on the price, especially considering where demand is coming from. Demand is speculative mostly. It's not largely increasing through real organic monetary demand. And so the halving theory really works because people believe it does, and so it's this self-fulfilling prophecy. Also, the larger macro reason is because we have election cycles every 4 years, and typically politicians are incentivized to try to grease markets during their re-election campaigns, and oftentimes that just happens to coincide with these Bitcoin halvings. So it's more of a historical correlation that won't hold up into the long-term future. The next fallacy we have on here is hoarding equals security. So a lot of people believe that just because you hold Bitcoin, you're increasing the security of the network, but it doesn't make Bitcoin more secure. Usage does. Really only economic activity, meaning economic participants on the network, people who actually run the Bitcoin software and accept goods and services for Bitcoin, increase security because you're increasing the number of independent validators and verifiers of the chain, and also the higher the demand for real economic usage drives the security level up. But speculation nets out over the long term, And so just hoarding, all it does is artificially restrict supply so that the price will go up, but all these people who are hoarding for just number go up reasons will eventually sell. So that idea doesn't make any sense. And the final one that we have is similar to the last fallacy. It's that holders are users of the network. A lot of people look at speculative adoption and think that just by holding Bitcoin, somehow you're an active participant. But again, only economic nodes matter on the Bitcoin chain, and just owning Bitcoin and hoarding the supply, especially if you're just on a custodial exchange, it doesn't make you a participant on the network. You're not a user of Bitcoin. You're really just a speculator. So that was a lot of fallacies to go through, and we went through them pretty quickly. But the reasons why, as we identified in the start of this video, really have largely been due to consistent price appreciation. It's been allowed to become so extreme because positive price momentum, because of the macroeconomic situation that we're in, allowed the narratives and fallacies to get more extreme. It's because we haven't had real significant increases in monetary adoption. We've just had speculative increases that these fallacies have gotten so extreme and prolific. But why will it eventually die? It has to. All these false beliefs will be proven untrue when inevitably the market forces them to. So the cost of staying wrong will just be too high into the long-term future. People rarely change their minds because of reasoned arguments. They change because it becomes too expensive not to. So I think when Bitcoin fees spike, if we do get this final parabolic run that should be as extreme as 2017, it's hard for me not to imagine that fees don't spike to $200. And then users, a large percentage of the real users of Bitcoin will migrate. And that will catalyze alternative change to increase significantly in price, which will kill kind of the last thing that's holding up all of these fallacies, which is price superiority. There won't be anything really left to hold Bitcoin maximalism together after that point. I think, to summarize, Bitcoin's been rallying on pure speculation alone, mainly from larger pools of capital buying Bitcoin, and it's a relatively smaller asset class than anything else. That's why we've seen the price appreciation. And because it's all speculation, we should get rotation at some point, and when momentum of altcoins starts outperforming Bitcoin, nobody will want to buy it. It will take so much money, and the relative strength will just decline so much that price BTC will underperform massively. And then because all of the usage and network stats aren't supporting Bitcoin maximalism, it'll finally go away. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope that made sense to everyone. And again, I know that these narratives won't die until the market forces them to, but it's good to at least outline them. I think it helps, at least if you're watching this early, to see through a lot of the hype and make rational decisions. Make sure to follow me on X at WLitecoin, subscribe to the YouTube at the Litecoin Forecast, and then keep an eye out for the book titled Why Everyone's Wrong About Bitcoin. Appreciate all the support, likes, and comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.